Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the wildest lore facts about Whiterun, Skyrim's great city of the plains. A city built on ancient secrets, warrior codes, feuding families, cursed trees, dragon skulls, and enough hidden darkness to keep a scholar busy for a lifetime. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. The First Wanderers. The story of Whiterun begins not with a king, not with a jarl, and not with a grand plan, but with a crew of weary sailors who dragged their ship out of the water and never left. In the late Merethic era, a Nord explorer named Jeek of the River led a band of roughly 22 companions across the wilderness of ancient Skyrim. They were searching for something, though the old records aren't entirely clear on what. Some lore suggests they were following rumors of a great relic. Others say they were simply wandering, as warriors of that age often did, looking for a place worthy of their blood. What they found in the middle of the vast plains of what would become Whiterun Hold was something that stopped them cold. An enormous stone forge, glowing faintly with heat that had no visible source, perched on a rocky outcrop above the grassland. They called it the Skyforge, and they decided, right then and there, that they were done traveling. This flat expanse of windswept land surrounded by distant mountains would become one of the most important cities in all of Tamriel, and it all started because a group of wandering Nords were too amazed to keep walking. The Skyforge's true age. The Skyforge is far older than the Companions, far older than Whiterun, and far older than the Nords themselves. When Jeek of the river's crew first encountered it, they weren't the first to be awed by it. Ancient snow elves, the ancestors of the farmer, were known to have feared the Skyforge deeply, giving it wide berth and regarding it with something closer to dread than reverence. Their legends spoke of it as a place where the boundary between the mortal world and something older, something beyond naming, was thin enough to cause discomfort. The forge predates written records entirely, and in-game scholars cannot agree on what created it or how it maintains its constant heat without fuel. What they do agree on is this: the metal worked at the Skyforge takes on properties that metal worked elsewhere simply cannot replicate. Weapons forged there carry an edge and a durability that baffles conventional metallurgy. Whatever ancient power lives in that stone basin has been producing extraordinary craftsmanship since before human civilization in Skyrim was even a concept. The founding of Jorrvaskr. The 22 companions who founded Jorrvaskr were not just travelers. They were warriors who had fought together across multiple campaigns and developed a bond rare in any era. Their founding of the settlement that would grow into Whiterun was not a formal act of city planning. There was no ceremony, no charter, no designation of districts. They simply built, settled in, and began training. The original group established what would become the unwritten code of the Companions. Honor in combat, loyalty to your shield siblings, and no questions asked about what someone did before they arrived at the hall. This last principle was intentional. Many of the original 22 were people with complicated histories, former soldiers, exiles, and wanderers who needed a fresh start. Jorrvaskr became, from its very first days, a refuge as much as a warrior's hall, a place where your past didn't define you, only what you were willing to become. The naming of Whiterun. The name Whiterun has a deceptively simple origin. The plains surrounding the hold are swept by near-constant winds blowing down from the throat of the world and across the flatlands. In the autumn and winter months, frost coats the tall grasses, and on clear mornings the entire plain appears to glow white under the pale sky. The Nords, who first settled there, described their daily runs across these gleaming fields, runs for hunting, training and patrol, as running the White Plains. Over generations, this shorthand collapsed into a single word: Whiterun. The hold's name is, at its core, a love letter to the landscape written by people who ran through it every day of their lives. The mountains visible on the horizon, the throat of the world to the southeast, the Pale to the north, the Reaches highlands to the west, give the plains a sense of being cupped in the hands of Skyrim's geography. Travelers who approach Whiterun for the first time often describe a feeling of openness, of being exposed and protected simultaneously. That paradox is baked into the city's name from the very beginning. The three districts and what they mean. Whiterun is divided into three distinct districts, each occupying a different elevation on the rocky hill the city was built upon, and each carrying its own social significance that goes beyond simple geography. The lowest level is the Plains District, which contains the marketplace, the main gates, and most of the shops and services a traveller would need. It is the city's face, the part that deals with the outside world, handles commerce, and manages the constant flow of merchants and caravans that make Whiterun the trading hub of Skyrim's interior. Above it sits the Wind District, a residential area where Whiterun's established families live, the Battleborns and the Greymanes chief among them. This middle tier is where the city's social conflicts play out in plain sight, where old grudges fester in full view of neighbours who've known each other for generations. At the top, on the highest point of the rocky outcrop, sits the Cloud District, home to Dragon's Reach, the Jarl's Palace, and the Companion's Compound. This elevation is not accidental. Power, in Whiterun, literally looks down on everyone else, and everyone else looks up at it. The city's layout encodes its social hierarchy into its very architecture. The heart of Skyrim. Whiterun is not Skyrim's capital. That title belongs to Solitude in the northwest. But for much of Skyrim's functional history, Whiterun has been the more important city from a purely practical standpoint. It sits almost exactly in the geographic center of Skyrim, making it the natural crossroads of trade routes connecting every major hold. Caravans moving east to west, north to south, they all pass through or near Whiterun. The Khajiit merchant caravans that travel Skyrim's roads always have a camp just outside Whiterun's gates, drawn by the volume of traffic. The city's marketplace sees goods from Solitude's docks in the west, from Riften's criminal economy in the east, from Windhelm's ancient Nord craftsmanship in the northeast, and from Markarth's silver mines in the far west. This centrality has made Whiterun wealthy without requiring great military power, political cunning, or natural resource wealth. The city simply sits at the intersection of everyone else's ambitions and collects a toll, in the form of trade, for the privilege of passing through. The Western Watchtower's true age, the ruined watchtower just outside Whiterun's western gates, the one where you fight Murmulna in the main quest, is older than most players notice or think about. The game never specifies exactly when it was built or by whom, but its crumbling stone construction and long ruined state suggest it predates the current era's Whiterun by a considerable margin. Skyrim's hold capitals maintain networks of watchtowers and border fortifications going back centuries, with older towers gradually falling to disrepair as political priorities shifted. The one near Whiterun is one of the more recognizable examples simply because the hold's relatively stable political history meant nobody felt the need to demolish it for building materials. By the time of Skyrim's events in 4E201, the tower is used only as a scouting post by Whiterun's guards, a function watchtowers like it were built for generations earlier, now performed by people going about a routine that's been routine so long, nobody questions it. The horse and the banner. Whiterun's coat of arms, the white horse on a blue background that you see on banners throughout the city, has a history that most players walk past without a second glance. The horse has been Whiterun's symbol since the early First Era, when the plains were famous for producing some of the finest war horses in Tamriel. The grasslands of Whiterun hold, stretching south past Rorikstead and north toward the Pale Border, provided ideal conditions for horse breeding. In military terms, Whiterun cavalry were considered elite, and the horse on the banner was a statement of that pride. By the Fourth Era, the horse breeding tradition has faded significantly. The hold's economy has shifted toward grain farming and trade, but the symbol remains, a relic of an older identity. When you ride a horse through Whiterun's gates, you're inadvertently honoring a tradition the city has mostly forgotten it once held. The original city walls. The current walls surrounding Whiterun were not the first fortifications built on that site. Archaeological evidence referenced in various books throughout the game suggests that the original settlement had much simpler palisade defenses, sharpened wooden stakes and earthen berms rather than the stone walls that stand today. The transition to stone fortification happened gradually across the First Era, as the settlement grew wealthy enough to fund major construction and politically significant enough to require it. The inner walls surrounding Dragon's Reach, the second ring of fortification on the hill's upper tier, are actually older than the outer walls by several centuries, reflecting a period when the Jarl's seat was protected, while the lower city was still largely unfortified. This layered history of construction means that Whiterun's walls are a geological record of the city's growing importance, each ring of stone representing a point at which someone with power decided this city was worth defending more seriously than it had been before. The Skyforge's bird. The Skyforge is topped by a massive stone bird, an eagle or hawk carved into the rock above the forge basin itself. Most players assume this is Nord artistic decoration, a symbol of the companions or of Whiterun's military culture. The truth preserved in ancient texts is stranger and more unsettling. The bird shape was not carved by Nords. It was already there when Jeek of the River's crew arrived in the Merethic era. The shape is part of the forge's original structure, and its purpose is entirely unknown. Some scholars in the game's extended lore suggest it may be a representation of an entity associated with whatever power fuels the forge, a guardian or spirit marker left by whoever or whatever created the Skyforge in the first place. Others believe it is purely decorative, a coincidental weathering of stone that only looks like a bird from certain angles. But the Snow Elves' fear of the forge, combined with this ancient unexplained symbol, suggests the Skyforge may have a spiritual dimension that even the companions who use it daily have never fully understood. The plains that once were forest, Whiterun's famous open grasslands, the feature that defines the hold's visual identity and gives it its name, were not always treeless plains. Ancient records and geological evidence referenced in Elder Scrolls lore suggest that much of central Skyrim was forested in the deep Merethic era, with the deforestation occurring gradually as populations grew, as agriculture expanded, and as the climate of Tamriel shifted through the various cataclysms of the First and Second eras. The transition from forest to grassland happened slowly enough that no single generation experienced the full change, But cumulatively, over thousands of years, the great forest retreated. What remains of that ancient woodland survives in isolated patches. The forests around Riverwood, the stands of pines near Helgen, the Falkreath Woods to the south. Whiterun's plains are, in a sense, a scar left by civilization, a landscape that was cleared and never allowed to grow back because it proved too useful as farmland and grazing territory. The dragon in the dungeon. Dragon's Reach gets its name from one of the most ambitious acts in all of recorded Nordic history, the capture and imprisonment of a living dragon. In the First Era, around 1E 420, a Nord warrior jarl named Olaf One-Eye claimed to have defeated and captured the dragon Numinex atop Mount Antor, a mountainous dragon lair in the Winterhold region of Skyrim's far northeast. The dragon was not killed. Killing a dragon was impressive enough, but Olaf reportedly had grander ambitions. He wanted to prove total dominance, not just that he could destroy a dragon, but that he could break one, contain one, hold one as a trophy of absolute power. The Great Hall on the hill above Whiterun was built specifically to house this prisoner, and the central chamber designed with dimensions and reinforcements specifically calculated to hold a creature of Numinex's size. The skull that hangs above the Jarl's throne in 4E 201, centuries later, is Numinex, still there, still watching, long after everything else about Olaf's reign has faded from memory. Olaf One-Eye and the war he ended. Olaf One-Eye's capture of Numinex was not merely a personal achievement. It was a political masterstroke that ended a war. The War of Succession, a brutal conflict in which multiple Nord clans fought for supremacy over Skyrim. Following the collapse of the Alessian Empire's influence in the region, had been grinding for decades when Olaf made his move. The act of capturing a dragon, of demonstrating such overwhelming personal power and divine favor, shifted the political calculus overnight. Rival jarls who had been refusing to bend the knee suddenly found the argument against Olaf's high kingship very difficult to sustain. He became High King of Skyrim in 1E 420, the same year Dragon's Reach was completed, and his reign lasted until 1E 452. Whether the dragon capture was entirely the honest account Olaf claimed it was, or whether, as the bard Svafnir alleged, it was heavily embellished propaganda, is a question the lore leaves deliberately unanswered. The outcome was real either way. Skyrim got a high king, Whiterun got a palace, and Numinex got a very small room. Svafnir's Lost Song. One of Dragon's Reach's most fascinating hidden stories involves a bard who has been dead for more than 1,000 years. Svafnir was a contemporary of Olaf One-Eye, who, unlike most of his era's chroniclers, refused to celebrate the High King's dragon-taming legend. Svafnir believed, and wrote persuasively, that Olaf had not so much defeated Numinex in honourable combat, as he had found the dragon old, weak, and willing to be taken prisoner for reasons of his own. In Svafnir's version of events, the heroic battle was fabricated after the fact to justify Olaf's political ambitions, and the real story was far more complicated and far less flattering to the Nord concept of warrior supremacy. For writing this, Svafnir was imprisoned on Olaf's orders. His song was destroyed, every copy burned, and he died in captivity, his body sealed inside a hidden chamber in the ancient Nordic barrow, now known as Dead Men's Respite, southwest of Morthal. He was found centuries later still clutching the last surviving copy of his verse. The Bard's College quest that sends you there is an act of historical recovery, finding a dissident poet's last argument against a king who refused to be questioned, preserved in a dead man's hands for over 1,000 years. Numenex's final years. The life Numenex lived in Dragon's Reach was by any measure a terrible one. Dragons are creatures of vast sky and open horizon, beings whose natural state is movement, dominion, and the exercise of power. Numenex was confined to a stone chamber for the remainder of his physical life, unable to fly, unable to hunt, unable to do anything that made him a dragon, rather than simply a large, miserable prisoner. Ancient records suggest Numenex went slowly and progressively mad during his captivity, his already ancient mind fractured further by the confinement and the helplessness. The Dover word Numenex loosely translates to concepts related to being contained or bound, which raises interesting questions about whether Numenex had this name before his capture or whether it was assigned to him afterward, either by his captors or by other dragons acknowledging what had become of him. What we know from Paarthurnax, referenced in the main quest, is that Paarthurnax visited Numenex during his imprisonment, and that the captive dragon died in his cell alone, with the words of the oldest language on his tongue and nothing else. The architecture of captivity, the physical design of Dragon's Reach, reveals just how seriously Olaf One-Eye took the task of holding a dragon prisoner. The Great Hall's main chamber is notably taller than functionally necessary for human occupation. The high vaulted ceiling exists specifically to accommodate Numenex's body during the period when the dragon was alive and needed space to exist without constantly colliding with stone. The massive chains you can see incorporated into the ancient sections of Dragon's Reach's dungeon were forged at the Skyforge specifically for binding a dragon, which is why Yorland Greymane's forge has the capability, later in the main quest, to help create the Dragonren Shout's associated equipment. The very bones of the building are shaped around the fact that it once held a living god. Walking through Dragon's Reach in 4E201, you're moving through architecture designed for a population that was never fully human. The balcony that changed everything, the large balcony extending from Dragon's Reach's upper level, overlooking the plains of Whiterun to the south and east, is one of the most strategically significant pieces of architecture in the main quest, and one of the most story-rich locations in the entire game. It was from this balcony, or one that occupied the same position in previous centuries, that High King Olaf allegedly stood after Numenex's capture and declared his authority over all of Skyrim. It is from this same balcony in the game's present day that the Dragonborn stands during the trap set for Odahviing, using the rebuilt dragon trapping mechanism to capture a live dragon the same way Olaf did a millennium and a half earlier. The balcony closes a narrative circle. The first Dragonborn proves their power in the same location and through the same method as the legendary Nord king who built the palace. What Olaf did with propaganda and uncertain circumstances, the player character repeats with absolute authenticity. Farengar's hidden agenda. Whiterun's court mage, Farengar Secret Fire, presents himself as an academic, a scholar of destruction magic and ancient Nordic artifacts who has cultivated an eccentric, slightly dismissive personality that keeps most visitors at arm's length. But the evidence scattered through his quarters and through his dialogue suggests a more complicated allegiance. Farengar's research into dragons, his library, his correspondence, his focus on Dragonstone, predates the return of the dragons by years. He was not reacting to events, he was anticipating them. Delphine's knowledge of him and her infiltration of his quarters to steal the Dragonstone map suggests that intelligence networks were already watching Farengar as someone connected to the flow of information about the dragon crisis. The fact that Delphine, a Blades agent, knew exactly where the Dragonstone map was and that Farengar would have it, implies some level of shared awareness between them that goes beyond coincidence. Whether Farengar is a formal Blades affiliate, a sympathizer, or simply a scholar whose research made him accidentally useful to multiple parties isn't spelled out. But based on what we know of how the Blades operate, positioning a knowledgeable contact inside Whiterun's court well before the dragon's return would be exactly the kind of preparation they'd make. The court mage of Whiterun may have known the dragons were coming back before almost anyone in Skyrim was willing to believe it. The Jarl's children's mother, Jarl Balgruuf the Greater, has 3 children visible in Dragon's Reach, Frotha, Dagny and Nelke, and the game never mentions their mother at all. Not a single NPC references her. There's no portrait, no memorial, no ring in the Jarl's private quarters bearing her name. The children range in age from approximately 8 to perhaps 12 or 13, suggesting a marriage or relationship that ended within the last decade. Whether Balgruuf's wife died, left, or was never formally a spouse is left entirely to the player's imagination. What makes this gap more interesting is that each of Balgruuf's children appears to have a distinct personality. Frotha is earnest and eager to please his father. Dagny is imperious and demanding in a way that suggests she's been told she's important her entire short life, and Nelke is deeply unsettling. The youngest child, who sits in dark corners, speaks in unsettling fragments and is secretly being whispered to by Mephala through the whispering door. To what 3 children, 3 very different temperaments, and no visible parent to explain where any of them came from. The whispering door. In Dragon's Reach's lower level, there is a locked door that the game presents as relatively unremarkable. A piece of Nordic decor perhaps, or simple storage. Nelke, the Jarl's youngest child, knows it is something else entirely. The door is called the Ebony Blades Prison, and the Daedric Prince Mephala, the Prince of Secrets, Lies, and Web Spinning, has been communicating with Nelke through it. Mephala's influence on a child is one of the more quietly horrifying elements of Dragon's Reach's hidden story. The child is not possessed or overtly corrupted. He simply knows things he should not know, says things that are too precise and too observant for someone his age, and directs you to the door with a calm that suggests he has been anticipating your arrival. The ebony blade retrieved from behind that door is a Daedric artifact that grows more powerful the more trusted companions you kill with it. Kabetichiadisha, weapon designed specifically to weaponize betrayal. That this weapon has been sitting beneath Whiterun's seat of power, slowly leaking Mephala's influence into the Jarl's youngest child, suggests that the city's apparent stability has been quietly compromised from below for years. The real reason Balgruuf stays neutral. Much of the dialogue around Jarl Balgruuf's famous neutrality in the Civil War frames it as principled pragmatism. He doesn't want to commit Whiterun to either side until forced to by circumstance. But the deeper reading of his character, assembled from his dialogue, his history with Ulfric, and the political reality of Whiterun's position, suggests something more personal. Balgruuf and Ulfric Stormcloak knew each other as young men. The nature of their relationship is not specified. Rivals, perhaps, or allies who grew apart, or something more complicated. But the Jarl's discomfort when Ulfric is discussed goes beyond political disagreement. He speaks about Ulfric with a kind of tired, sad familiarity that suggests someone who once knew a man well and now can't recognize what that man has become. His neutrality may not be about Whiterun's strategic position, so much as a personal refusal to formally declare war on someone he used to know. The politics are real, but underneath them is the grief of a man watching a former companion destroy the country they both love. The moat skeleton. At the base of the rocky cliff below Dragon's Reach, partially submerged in the water at the bottom of the natural moat that surrounds the palace's foundation, there is a skeleton. It has no name, no associated quest, and no explanation. It respawns. Gold occasionally appears nearby, suggesting the bones belong to someone who fell or was pushed while carrying valuables. The drop from Dragon's Reach's upper levels to the bottom of that rocky declivity is substantial enough to be instantly fatal for any non-magically enhanced human. Theories range from the mundane, a guard who slipped during a rainstorm, to the politically charged, someone who knew something the Jarl's court didn't want known. The skeleton's respawning nature in game terms suggests it's an ambient detail rather than a clue to a hidden quest. But in-world, an endlessly recycling skeleton at the base of the Jarl's fortress is either a ghost trapped in endless re-death or a very interesting commentary on what happens to people who get too close to Whiterun's center of power. The High Hrothgar connection. Dragon's Reach and High Hrothgar, the ancient monastery of the Greybeards at Skyrim's highest peak, share more than geography. Both were built with an awareness of the Dragonborn prophecy and the eventual return of the dragons. The Greybeards monastery was established in the late Merethic era by Jurgen Windcaller as a place for those devoted to the way of the voice to study and wait. Dragon's Reach was built in the First Era partly as a practical response to what the Greybeards had long been predicting, that dragons would return, that someone would need the capability to hold one, and that Skyrim's political center needed to be prepared. The decision to locate Whiterun's Jarl seat on the same general axis as the throat of the world, the mountain visible from Dragon's Reach's balcony on clear days, may not be architectural coincidence. Nord builders of that era regularly oriented significant structures relative to sacred geography, and there is no more sacred geographical feature in all of Skyrim than the mountain where the world was created. The circle's secret origin, the inner circle of the companions, the elite group of warriors who know the lycanthropy secret, was not part of the original organization's founding vision. The companions who built Joravaska and trained through the First and Second eras were human in the conventional sense, bound only by their warrior's code and their communal life around the mead hall. The Ge, Beastblood, entered the companions in the later Second era, when a harbinger named Terfig made a desperate bargain with the Glenmoril witches, hag ravens who live in the wilds of Falkreath Hold. Terfig was facing a crisis that the historical record is vague about, possibly a threat to the companion's existence, possibly a personal failing he wanted to compensate for, possibly simple ambition. The deal he made transformed him and a selected few others into werewolves, giving the Circle extraordinary combat power at the cost of something they did not fully understand at the time: the forfeiture of an afterlife in Aetherius. Werewolves who die are claimed by Hircine's hunting grounds rather than passing to Sovngarde, which means Terfig effectively sold his companions' souls without their full informed consent. The secret has been kept for centuries. Kodlak's spiritual crisis. By the time of the game's events in 4E201, Harbinger Kodlak Whitemane is an old man carrying a burden that has been building for decades. The lycanthropy itself no longer troubles him physically. The Beastblood is simply part of who he is. What has begun to weigh on Kodlak is the theological implication. He has spent a lifetime studying the old Nord traditions, reading accounts of Sovngarde, listening to the prayers offered to Talos and the old gods, and he has gradually become convinced that the afterlife offered to werewolves by Hircine is not a worthy end for a warrior who lived by honor. He wants to die as a man and go to Sovngarde. The quest to cure the beast blood that drives much of the companion's storyline is Kodlak's last great project. Not a rejection of who he was, but an assertion of who he wants to be when he finally meets the criteria for judgment. His death at the hands of the Silver Hand before he can complete this quest is one of the game's genuinely tragic moments. A good man cut down not by failure, but by the simple cruelty of timing, the Silver Hand's justified cause. It is easy, playing through the companion's questline, to view the Silver Hand purely as antagonists. Werewolf hunters who attack the companions, steal Wuthrad's fragments, and kill Kodlak. But the Silver Hand's perspective, assembled from their writings and their stated motivations, is not without logic. They are hunters who specialize in werewolves, and the companions, Skyrim's most famous warrior guild, trusted by every jarl and merchant in the land, secretly harbor a lycanthropic inner circle. From the Silver Hand's viewpoint, the companions have been operating a werewolf conspiracy at the heart of Skyrim's civil society for centuries. Their rage is not random. The attack that kills Kodlak follows the companions' assault on one of the Silver Hand's own bases. The battle was started by the player character on the companion's behalf, and the Silver Hand retaliated. The moral clarity the game frames around these events is, on closer inspection, significantly murkier than it first appears. Yorland Greymane's art, the blacksmith who works the Skyforge, is, by any reasonable measure, the finest weaponsmith in Skyrim, and possibly in all of Tamriel during the Fourth Era. Yorland Greymane has access to a heat source that no other forge in the world can replicate, combined with skills refined over a lifetime of working extraordinary materials. His work is displayed throughout the companion's armory and carries a quality that expert in-game characters consistently describe as unmatched. What makes Yorland particularly interesting as a character is his humility about all of this. He doesn't trumpet his accomplishments. He's a quiet man who works, who cares about his family and his forge, and who maintains a complicated emotional investment in the companion's welfare despite not being a warrior himself. He forges weapons for people who go out and risk their lives with them, and he understands what that means. When he reforges Wuthrad for Kodlak's funeral and Ysgramor's tomb, he is doing it not because he was asked, but because he understands the weight of the moment. The blade carries everyone who ever held it, and Yorland is adding one more name to that number. Wuthrad's long journey. Wuthrad, the great axe of Ysgramor, legendary hero of the companions, and one of the most important weapons in all of Nordic mythology, was not lost in a dragon attack or a war. In the Second Era, a necromancer of the Black Worm cult named Thalic Wormfather stole the axe and shattered it during a ritual, scattering the fragments across Skyrim. By 4E201, the companions had recovered 4 of those fragments and kept them on display inside Jorvaska, sacred relics of their lineage, not yet whole but still revered. The quest to recover all the remaining fragments and reforge the axe during the main companion storyline is the culmination of a process that has been ongoing for centuries. When Wuthrad is finally complete and brought to Ysgramor's tomb, it is being returned to its maker, a gesture of completion that allows the ancient hero to grant the cure Kodlak sought. Tilma the Haggard. Among Jorvaska's permanent residents is an elderly woman named Tilma, who is described as having maintained the mead hall for the companions for so long that nobody currently alive remembers her arriving. She cleans, she tends to the hall, she keeps things running, and she is entirely immune to the chaos that periodically erupts when a group of heavily armed lycanthropes argue about strategy, pride, and whose turn it is to clean out the supply room. Tilma is a background character that most players walk past without a second glance, but she represents something the game quietly acknowledges without making explicit. The companions as an institution are maintained not just by warriors, but by the people who keep the lights on and the floors swept. The companions' legendary reputation rests, in practical terms, partly on the work of a small, elderly woman who has been doing her job longer than most of the current members have been alive. Farkas and Vilkas, the split soul theory, the twin brothers. Farkas and Vilkas present one of the companions' most interesting philosophical puzzles. They are visually identical but temperamentally opposite. Farkas is warm, guileless, and comfortable with the beast blood, while Vilkas is scholarly, conflicted, and tormented by the lycanthropy in ways his brother seems not to experience. Lore fragments and unused dialogue suggest that ancient Nordic berserker magic sometimes involved splitting a single warrior soul across two bodies to create paired fighters who complemented each other's strengths. Whether the game intends this as Farkas and Vilkas' literal origin story is ambiguous, but their dynamic supports the reading. They don't just have different personalities, they seem to occupy different psychological roles, as if they are two responses to the same internal experience expressed through separate beings. The quest to cure the beast blood means forcing a metaphysical separation, asking Vilkas' analytical half and Farkas' instinctive half to solve the same problem independently, with one arriving at resolution and the other remaining comfortable with ambiguity. Ayla's refusal. Ayla the Huntress is, alongside Kodlak, the companion's most fully developed character, but her refusal to cure the beast blood stands in direct contrast to the Harbinger's desperate search for redemption. Ayla has embraced her lycanthropy completely, not as something she tolerates, but as something she considers central to her identity. She hunts, she runs. She is the wolf as much as she is the woman, and she does not regret this. What the player eventually learns, through unused dialogue and environmental storytelling scattered through her personal history, is that Ayla's embrace of the beast is not as uncomplicated as it appears. She carries specific grief that the wolf instincts help to suppress, losses she has never fully processed, decisions she made during transformations that she cannot face with a clear conscience. The beast blood is not just identity for Ayla. It is also anesthetic. She cannot afford to be cured because being fully human means sitting quietly with memories she has been running from for years. Vilkas' inner life. Vilkas reads. This is not a small thing among the companions, where literacy is regarded with faint suspicion, and books are generally considered less reliable than personal experience. Vilkas has shelves of them in his quarters, and his dialogue is consistently the most historically and philosophically informed of any companion. He knows the organization's origins, he understands its contradictions, and he is deeply, visibly uncomfortable with the lycanthropy in a way that he works hard to present as philosophical objection rather than personal fear. The fear is there though, visible in the careful way he speaks about the beast blood, as if he is describing it from a scholarly distance specifically to avoid feeling it emotionally. Vilkas wants to be a certain kind of warrior, honorable, controlled, master of himself. The wolf is an affront to that self-concept. Curing the beast blood is, for Vilkas, not about theology or afterlife, but about feeling like himself again, or perhaps feeling like himself for the first time. Skjor's devotion. Skjor, the scarred veteran circle member who mentors Isla and works closely with her on their covert hunting operations, is one of the companion's most quietly significant characters. He is fully committed to the lycanthropic identity in a way that even Ella, the group's most enthusiastic werewolf, sometimes seems to surpass in pure intensity. Where Ella embraces the wolf with joy, Skjor embraces it with grim determination, as if he made a decision long ago and has never allowed himself to question it since. His death, which occurs during a Silverhand ambush that he and Ella led without sanction from the companion's leadership, is the result of operating outside official channels, taking direct action when the formal organization was moving too slowly for his comfort. It is a warrior's death in the purest sense. He died doing what he believed in without permission, because waiting for permission was not something he was willing to do. Balgruf's war experience. Jarl Balgruf the Greater is not simply an administrator wearing a fine fur cloak. He is a veteran, and the details of his combat experience emerge through dialogue and environmental storytelling throughout Dragon's Reach. He fought during the period of significant regional conflict that preceded the Civil War, and his housecarl Irileth, a Dunmer warrior of considerable skill and even more considerable severity, has been at his side through those campaigns. The trust between Balgruf and Irileth is not the formal relationship of employer and guard, but the deeper bond of people who have stood in shield wall together, who have seen each other at their worst and most frightened, and who have come out the other side with something more reliable than affection. When Balgruf sends Irileth to deal with the dragon at the Western Watchtower, he is not sending a subordinate on an errand. He is deploying his most trusted battle companion, and the concern on his face during her absence is genuine. Irileth's singular position. Irileth is a Dunmer, a dark elf from Morrowind, serving as housecarl to the Jarl of Whiterun, one of the most prominently Nord cities in Skyrim. This is, culturally speaking, extraordinary. Nords in Skyrim's political culture generally do not extend the role of personal protector champion to anyone outside their own ethnicity, and the Civil War's racial tensions make the arrangement even more unusual. That Balgruf not only employs Irileth, but trusts her implicitly, and that the Whiterun Guard Corps follows her commands without visible resentment, speaks to either Irileth's exceptional personal reputation or Balgruf's exceptional personal authority, or more likely, both. Her speech to the Whiterun guards before the battle with Midamulna is one of the game's most effective leadership moments, delivered in flat, unemotional terms that somehow communicate more conviction than any battle cry could. Proventus Avenici's constant anxiety. The Jarl's steward. Proventus Avenici is, functionally, the most stressed person in Whiterun at almost any given moment. He manages the practical affairs of Dragon's Reach, supplies, staff, correspondence, political scheduling, and he does so with the chronic nervousness of someone who is perpetually aware of how many things could go wrong and how little margin for error his employer's political position provides. His daughter, Adrienne Avenici, runs War Maidens at the city's entrance, the weapons and armor shop, which creates a family dynamic where father and daughter occupy completely different economic and social positions in the same city. Proventus is courtly, anxious, and precise. Adrienne is practical, direct, and more competent than anyone gives her credit for. They share a last name and very little else in terms of how they approach their days. Adrianne's actual skill. Adrianne Avenici is, somewhat quietly, one of the better blacksmiths in Whiterun, despite operating in the shadow of Yorlan Greymane's legendary reputation. She makes conventional weapons and armor to a high standard, trains in the craft constantly, and manages the business side of war maidens with efficiency her anxious father probably couldn't manage. Her husband, Ulfberth Warbear, works at the shop but contributes primarily muscle and reputation, rather than the technical craftsmanship Adrianne provides. She was trained by her father to handle the books and shop management, but she taught herself the smithing side out of pure personal determination. This self-taught expertise is more impressive than it sounds. Blacksmithing, in Skyrim's context, is physically demanding, technically complex, and traditionally male-dominated. That Adrianne positioned herself as a legitimate craftsperson, rather than just a merchant in a city that already has. The Skyforge is either a testament to her determination, or evidence that she simply didn't consider failure an option. Ulfberth Warbear's hidden shame. Adrianne's husband Ulfberth presents himself as a tough, blunt former warrior, a man of simple tastes and direct communication, whose aggressive personality matches his physical size. But hints scattered through his dialogue and the atmosphere around war maidens suggest a more complicated history. During the Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, the conflict that produced the White Gold Concordat and the subsequent ban on Talos worship, Ulfberth was apparently a soldier. The defense of the imperial city during the Dominion's assault was one of the war's worst moments for imperial forces, and certain players have read the undercurrent of Ulfberth's personality, the overcompensating toughness, the adopted Nordic warrior name rather than an imperial family name, as signs of someone who came out of that war carrying something heavy. The name Warbear has the feel of a chosen identity, the kind of name a person takes when they want to be something they don't feel they've yet earned. Whether that reading is correct, or whether Ulfberth is simply a gruff tradesman who prefers Nordic custom, the game keeps ambiguous. What's clear is that behind the sharp words and the practiced bluster is someone whose relationship with his own history is not entirely at peace. Nazim and the farm. He never visits. Nazim is Whiterun's most famous irritant. The Redguard merchant whose opening gambit in every conversation is a variation of asking whether you get to the Cloud District very often, then answering his own question before you can respond. The joke, and it is a joke the developers clearly intended, is that Nazim's entire social identity is built around proximity to power he barely has. He owns Chilfurrow Farm outside the city walls, a productive enough holding, but his actual time is spent wandering Whiterun's marketplace area, performing the role of a man of substance. He rarely, if ever, visits the farm he owns, leaving the actual agricultural work to his workers. His wife Ahlam, also found in Whiterun, expresses open frustration with his social performance and the emptiness she experiences in their marriage. Nazim's insufferable quality is not malice. It is the specific sadness of a person who has decided that appearing successful is more important than doing anything that deserves success. Hulda and the Bannered Mare. The Bannered Mare, Whiterun's central tavern and information hub, is run by Hulda, a warm, practically minded woman who has operated the inn long enough to have opinions about every regular customer, comfortable relations with the travelling merchants who pass through, and a detailed mental map of which city residents are likely to start fights if seated too close to each other. Hulda is one of the game's more quietly accomplished background characters. She runs a profitable business in a competitive environment, manages staff, monitors her patrons for signs of imminent violence, and provides the player character with bounties, rumors, and context with equal efficiency. She has mentioned plans to retire at some point, and has identified Isolde, the young aspiring merchant who dreams of buying the bannered mare, as a preferred successor. What Hulda does not know, and what changes the whole texture of this succession plan, is that Isolde's business interests extend considerably further than simple tavern ownership. Isolde's empire. Isolde presents herself as an ambitious but straightforward young merchant. She wants to buy the bannered mare, she needs to learn the trade, and she requires a mammoth tusk to secure good relations with the Khajiit caravans who can teach her about business. This is the story's surface. Underneath it, the letters found at Sleeping Tree Camp reveal that Isolde has been operating as a distributor for Sleeping Tree sap, a powerful narcotic substance harvested from the strange glowing tree growing at a giant camp west of Whiterun. Through a partnership with an orc named Ulag, who was killed before the game begins. The tree's origin is a mystery even Isolde acknowledges she doesn't fully understand. Some say it grew from a fragment of Red Mountain, blasted across Skyrim when Vardenfell erupted, while others claim it was a spore that fell from one of Tamriel's floating sky islands. Whatever its origin, its sap is potent enough to trade at serious profit. Isolde's connection to the Khajiit caravans is not just about learning commerce, but about establishing distribution networks for controlled substances. The mammoth tusk she asks you to retrieve is cover for building relationships with caravan members who can move product. If you marry Isolde, you are technically marrying someone running a distribution operation out of one of Skyrim's busiest market cities, with a side goal of eventually owning the building where her customers go to drink. The Great Schism, the Battleborn and Greymane clans, are the two most prominent Nordic families in Whiterun, and their ancient alliance, they were both founding families of Whiterun's early settlement culture, both connected to the Companion's original era, has collapsed into bitter public enmity over the Civil War. The split is not merely political, it has metastasized into something that touches every aspect of both families' lives: who they speak to, where they shop, which side of the marketplace they walk through, which seats they take at the bannered mare. Neighbors who grew up together now pass each other in silence. The feud has consumed so much emotional energy that both families have lost sight of how much they once shared. The irony that two families whose ancestors helped build the same city are now treating each other as enemies is not lost on Whiterun's more reflective citizens. But observation and intervention are different things, and nobody seems willing to do the second. Idolaf's knowledge. Idolaf Balborn knows where Thorald Greymane is. He knows the Thalmor are holding him. He knows this information would matter enormously to Fralia Greymane, who is slowly being destroyed by grief over her missing son. And he will not tell her. His reasoning, if pressed, is political. Revealing what he knows would help the Greymanes, and helping the Greymanes is something a Battleborn simply does not do right now. This is one of the game's most precise cruelties. A man watching a mother mourn, possessing the one piece of information that could redirect her grief into action, and choosing his family's political stance over basic human decency. It is not that Idolaf is evil, exactly. He is someone who has let his tribal loyalty override his conscience so completely that he can watch suffering he could alleviate and categorize it as acceptable collateral damage in a political disagreement. Fralia's grief. Fralia Greymane, the elderly matriarch who sells jewelry from a market stall and grieves visibly over her missing son, is one of Whiterun's most quietly devastating characters. She is convinced Thorold is still alive when the rest of Whiterun, including the Battleborns who know the truth, has either given up or decided not to care. Her insistence is not denial. She's right, but being right doesn't make the situation any less painful. She is a mother with no resources, no military power, and no access to the kind of information that would let her act. All she can do is ask. When she approaches the Dragonborn, she does, so not with the authority of someone who has influence to trade, but with the naked desperation of someone who has run out of other options. The contrast between her public-facing role, calm jewelry, merchant at a market stall, nodding pleasantly to customers, and the private grief she carries every hour is the particular kind of performance forced on people who cannot afford to appear broken in a world that would simply step around them if they fell apart. Thorold's imprisonment. Thorold Greymane, whose fate drives the family's subplot, is being held at Northwatch Keep, a Thalmor prison on the northern coast of Skyrim. His crime, in Thalmor terms, was being too openly associated with Stormcloak sympathetic circles and too unwilling to suppress his opinions about the White Gold Concordate's Talos worship prohibition. But the real reason Thorold is a useful prisoner, rather than a publicly executed criminal, is more strategic. As a member of Whiterun's Greymane family, he provides the Thalmor with quiet leverage over a prominent Nordic family in Skyrim's central city. The Thalmor's method of control is rarely direct violence. It is the sustained pressure of knowing that someone you love is in a room you cannot reach, being held for reasons that can always be escalated if you cause trouble. Thorold is a hostage dressed up as a prisoner. John Battleborn's letters, the most human story in the Battleborn versus Greymane feud, belongs to John Battleborn, the youngest member of the Imperial Aligned family, who has been secretly writing love letters to Ulfina Greymane and receiving responses. Their romance blooms in the spaces between the feud. Exchanged notes, careful meetings, a connection that neither family would sanction. The letters John has written are romantic in the genuine sense, not as political gesture, but as the words of a young man who has decided that he loves someone his family considers an enemy. If you retrieve one of Ulfina's letters, for Cyrus in the Argonian sailor's questline, you participate in what is essentially a clandestine courier service for two young people trying to live a private life inside a public war. Their story has no resolution in the game. Whiterun ends as it begins. The families still feuding, John still writing letters, Ulfina still responding, and both of them continuing to love each other in the margins of a conflict they didn't choose and can't end. Vignar takes the throne. If the Stormcloaks win the civil war and capture Whiterun, Vignar Greymane becomes Jarl, the eldest surviving member of the family given the seat of power as reward for their loyalty to Ulfric's cause. The problem is that Vignar knows, with the clarity of someone who has watched a lot of things go wrong in a long life, that he is not the right person for this. He's too old, too tired, and too honest about his limitations to perform the confident authority a Jarl's seat requires. His dialogue after taking power is full of a particular kind of Nordic resignation. He accepts the burden because his family needs him to, but he makes no claims to enthusiasm. He misses Balgruf, not politically, not pragmatically, but personally. He misses having someone competent in that chair, even if that someone was on the wrong side of the war. Vignar's reign over Whiterun is characterized by its own kind of tragedy. A good man forced into a role he knows he cannot fill adequately, doing his best anyway because someone has to. Ulfina's double life. Ulfina Greymane works as a barmaid at the Bannered Mare, a deliberate choice that gives her income, independence from her family's increasingly fraught household, and daily contact with the broadest possible cross-section of Whiterun's population. She is more observant than her role suggests, more politically aware than the simple barmaid performance implies, and considerably more comfortable with the complexity of her situation than most people in similar positions would be. She loves John Battleborn. She works for Holder. She lives with her Stormcloak-aligned family. She navigates these contradictory allegiances with a practicality that is either admirable or chilling, depending on how you read her. When the Civil War reaches Whiterun directly, when soldiers camp in the streets and fire burns near the Gildergreen, Ulfina continues to serve drinks with the particular competence of someone who has decided that doing your job is the most honest response to chaos. Brenuin the beggar, at the lower end of Whiterun's social structure, sleeping rough near the market and cadging coin from passers-by, is Brenuin, an imperial man of indeterminate age who is functionally homeless in a city with no shelter system for people who fall between the cracks. His dialogue reveals someone who was not always in this position, who had a working life before whatever sequence of misfortunes brought him to the plaza with his hand out. He is not aggressive, not dishonest about what he is, and not particularly self-pitying. He is simply there, every day, surviving on whatever the city's merchants and travelers choose to spare. The game uses characters like Brenuin to texture its world with economic reality. Not every resident of Whiterun is a merchant, warrior, or court official. Some are people for whom the city's prosperity has meant nothing because they cannot access it. Brenuin drinks whatever he can afford to drink and watches the market from below with the patient attention of someone with nowhere else to be. Arcadia's depth, Arcadia's cauldron. The alchemy shop in the Plains District is run by a Redguard woman named Arcadia, who is, on the surface, a brisk and businesslike potion merchant. What her dialogue gradually reveals is someone with a sophisticated understanding of pharmacology, a genuine passion for the craft of alchemy, and strong opinions about which ingredients should never be combined in the presence of people you like. Arcadia trained formally at some point. Her knowledge is too systematic to be entirely self-taught, and she chose to establish her shop in Whiterun rather than a larger city, which suggests either a preference for the trading hub's consistent customer flow or a past in one of Skyrim's larger cities that she found it necessary to put behind her. She speaks about her work with the quiet enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loves what they do, which makes her one of Whiterun's more pleasant shop interactions, even when she's declining to explain exactly what went into a particular brew. The companions' whelps, the newest recruits to the companions, called whelps, a word that carries the full weight of Nordic hazing culture, include Rhea, Torvar, and Athis, three characters who occupy the lower end of the companions' social hierarchy, with varying degrees of success. Rhea is enthusiastic, idealistic, and the most openly eager to learn. Torvar drinks too, much, and is aware that this reflects poorly on him, which doesn't stop him drinking too much. Athis is a dark elf who has somehow found a home in the most aggressively Nordic warrior organization in Skyrim, a fact that speaks to either remarkable personal competence or a remarkably flexible definition of what qualifies as Nordic culture. All three are presented as less advanced than the Circle members, not because the game doesn't have room for them, but because the Companions as an institution is always about the space between where you are and where you could be. The gap between whelp and companion is the entire story. Heimska's scholar past. Heimska, the Talos preacher, whose daily sermons from the Whiterun marketplace have have become one of the game's most iconic sources of ambient irritation, was not always a street preacher. His knowledge of Talos doctrine, the theological arguments, the historical context, the specific language of devotion, is too sophisticated for someone who simply picked up a pamphlet and started shouting. He was a scholar before the White Gold Concordat made his field of expertise illegal. His books on Talos theology, once respectable academic documents in an era when the cult was openly practiced, became contraband overnight when the treaty was signed. His public preaching is not performance, but desperation. The act of someone who has watched their life's work become criminalized and responded by making the argument louder, because making it quieter was impossible. When Imperials take Whiterun and arrest Heimska, they are arresting someone whose only crime was refusing to abandon a belief that was perfectly legal for the first several decades of his adult life. Carlotta Valentia's persistence. Carlotta Valentia runs the food stall in the Whiterun marketplace and is one of the most competent single parents visible in the game. She manages a market stall, raises her daughter Mila, maintains a living without apparent spousal support, and fends off the unwanted romantic attention of both Mikael the Bard at the Bannered Mare and Sven from Riverwood, with varying degrees of patience. The harassment from both men is not cartoon villainy. It is the specific grinding experience of a woman trying to work who has people constantly treating her workspace as a romantic venue. When you help her send either man away, she is grateful in the practical way of someone who needed a problem solved so she could get back to work. Her daughter Mila wanders the city during the day, curious and energetic, and Carlotta has given her enough freedom and enough sense to manage both. Mikael's cowardice. Mikael the Bard performs at the Bannered Mare and conducts himself with the confidence of someone who has confused musical competence for personal character. His repeated approaches to Carlotta Valentia, despite her clear and consistent disinterest, reflect a specific kind of person who has decided that persistence is the same as charm. The companions can be asked to discourage him from this behavior, and the method, a brief, pointed physical conversation, proves immediately effective in a way that words apparently have not. Mikael's response to being confronted is also revealing. He backs down immediately, without the principled argument of someone who genuinely believed he was behaving appropriately. He knew. He just thought the social cost of persisting was acceptable until suddenly there were tangible consequences. His continued employment at the Bannered Mare after this episode is either a tribute to Hulda's pragmatism or a commentary on how little accountability Whiterun's social structures provide for this specific category of behavior. Amren's family drama. Amren is one of Whiterun's guards, a Red Guard veteran who patrols the city with the resigned competence of someone who has seen enough to be rarely surprised. His personal life, which bleeds into his professional conduct in the way personal lives always do, involves a stolen family sword and a daughter named Saphir, who follows him around the city asking about it. The sword was taken by bandits who hit a trade caravan Amren was supposed to be guarding, and recovering it has become both a practical goal and an emotional necessity. It represents his family's honor in the Red Guard tradition, and failing to recover it means failing his daughter. When you retrieve the blade and return it to him, the gratitude is quiet and genuine, not the performed appreciation of an NPC completing a transaction, but the specific relief of someone who has been carrying a failure around for long enough that resolution feels like putting down something heavy. Severio Pelagia's agricultural anxiety. Severio Pelagia runs Pelagia Farm just outside Whiterun's walls, growing wheat and other staple crops that supply the city's baking and brewing economy. He is from Cyrodiil originally, the imperial province to the south, and came to Skyrim for reasons his dialogue is vague about, possibly economic opportunities in the post-Great War resettlement period. His primary occupation, beyond farming, appears to be worrying. He worries about the wind. He worries about the crops. He worries about bandits. He worries about whether the soil is as good as it was last season. This ambient anxiety is presented without mockery. Pelagia is a man who has staked his livelihood on conditions he cannot control, and the worry is the entirely rational response of someone aware of his own vulnerability. The calm he radiates when the day is going well is, by contrast, almost moving. A brief respite in an ongoing war against uncertainty that farmers have been fighting since the first seed was planted in Nordic soil. Danica Purespring's burden. The priestess of Kinnereth who tends the temple of Kinnereth in Whiterun is responsible for healing the sick and injured who come to her shrine. But her most visible current burden is the Gildergreen, the ancient sacred tree planted outside her temple that has been damaged by lightning and appears to be dying. Danica's distress about the tree goes beyond aesthetic concern. The Gildergreen is the spiritual anchor of Kinnereth's presence in Whiterun. Its health is tied to the temple's significance and to the pilgrimages that draw faithful from across the hold. A dead or dying Gildergreen is a temple losing its central symbol, and the priestess who oversees its decline feels that loss as professional failure. When you help her restore the tree, either through the violent method of harvesting Eldergleam sap or the gentler approach of bringing a sapling, you are not just completing a quest, but participating in a community's spiritual renewal. The Gildergreen's true parent. The Gildergreen, the great tree growing in the small plaza in front of Kinnereth's temple in Whiterun, is not a naturally occurring tree. It was grown from a cutting or seedling taken from the Eldergleam, a tree that is widely accepted as the oldest living thing in all of Tamriel. The Eldergleam grows in the Eastmarch Hold, in a cave sanctuary called Eldergleam Sanctuary, and it has been growing since before recorded history. How old it actually is cannot be determined with existing scholarship. The methods used to date other ancient things simply don't apply to something that predates those methods. What makes the Gildergreen particularly interesting is that it has been growing in Whiterun for long enough to reach an impressive size on its own, which means the cutting was taken from Eldergleam far enough back to predate most of Whiterun's current architecture. The Gildergreen is, in a real sense, an ambassador from something older than civilization, planted in the middle of a city and tended by people who understand its importance without fully grasping its age. The pilgrimage to Eldergleam, the Eldergleam Sanctuary, where the parent tree grows, is not merely a botanical curiosity. It is a site of active Kinnereth pilgrimage, a holy place where the faithful travel to pray, to touch the tree's roots, and to experience what they describe as the direct presence of the nature goddess. Maurice Gendrel, a pilgrim you can encounter during the Gildergreen quest, represents thousands of years of this tradition. People who have been making this journey for as long as both trees have existed, drawn by something they experience rather than simply believe. The sanctuary's atmosphere in-game supports this. The light filters through the cave's opening in columns. The roots of the Eldergleam form natural archways, and the space carries an unmistakable quality of something that has been made sacred through accumulated human devotion, rather than divine decree. The gods of Tamriel, Elder Scrolls lore suggests, are strengthened by worship. The Eldergleam Sanctuary has been concentrating worship of Kinnereth for millennia. Nettlebane's dark origin. The weapon used to harvest Eldergleam's sap, Nettlebane, the Hagraven ritual blade required for the Gildergreen quest, is one of the more unsettling instruments in Skyrim's world for what it implies rather than what it shows. It is the only thing that can cut through the Eldergleam's roots, which are otherwise impervious to conventional tools. The Hagravens at Orphan Rock, who possess it, did not acquire it to harvest sap from ancient trees. They possessed it because Hagraven magic deals extensively in corrupted nature, in the transformation of living things, in the perversion of natural growth, in the specifically unnatural magic that makes a Hagraven what she is. That a blade designed for Hagraven ritual magic is also the only thing capable of wounding the oldest living thing in Tamriel is not coincidence. Hagraven power and natural power in Elder Scrolls lore exist on the same spectrum, opposed but connected. The Hagravens have a knife that can cut the world's oldest tree because they are, in twisted form, nature's shadow. The two choices at Eldergleam. When you arrive at Eldergleam Sanctuary with Nettlebane, the quest presents two paths. The first, and the one you're technically sent there to complete, is to use the blade to cut through the roots and harvest sap, which you'll bring back to Whiterun to revive the Gildergreen. The second option, suggested by Maurice Gendrell if you brought him along, is to simply take a sapling growing from the Eldergleam's base and carry that back instead. These are not equivalent choices. Harvesting the sap with Nettlebane causes the Eldergleam to cry out in pain. Maurice describes it as hearing the tree scream. And the nymphs who guard the sanctuary become hostile. Taking the sapling harms nothing. The Eldergleam simply sheds a piece of itself, as trees naturally do, and the sanctuary remains peaceful. Both choices restore the Gildergreen in Whiterun. Only one of them does so without causing harm to something ancient and holy. The game doesn't tell you which is morally correct. It shows you the consequences and lets you decide what you can live with. The Temple of Kinnereth's unique status. Whiterun's Temple of Kinnereth is the only dedicated Kinnereth temple in all of Skyrim as depicted in the game. Every other city has a Temple of Talos, or a Temple of Mara, or a general divine shrine. But Kinnereth, the goddess of nature, wind, and the sky, has her primary Skyrim presence concentrated in one building, in one city. This is not an accident of game design, but an in-world reflection of the Gildergreen's presence. The tree drew the faithful built the temple, and the temple grew in significance as the Gildergreen grew in size. Remove the tree, and the temple's special status diminishes. Restore it, and the pilgrimage routes from across the hold resume. Danica Pure Spring is not just a healer and priestess. She is the steward of the single most concentrated point of Kinnereth devotion in all of Skyrim, which makes the Gildergreen's near death during 4E201 a theological crisis as much as a botanical one. The Underforge's shadow. Beneath the Skyforge, carved into the rock below the Great Forge itself, is the Underforge, a cramped, dark chamber where the lycanthropic members of the Companion Circle conduct their most private rituals. The contrast with the Skyforge above is deliberate. The Skyforge is ancient, luminous, and open to the sky. It represents the Companions' public face, their craft and their honor. The Underforge is hidden, accessed through a secret entrance, dark and cramped. It represents the secret the Companions have been keeping for centuries. This physical duality, the forge above, the wolf-blood ceremonies below, encodes the Companions' fundamental contradiction into their architecture. You cannot walk up to the Skyforge without standing above the place where the beast blood ritual occurs. Every weapon Yorlan forges in the light is being forged directly above a ceremony that happens in the dark. The companions have been building on top of their secret for so long that the secret has become the foundation. Kinnereth in the Wind. The cult of Kinnereth has a specific relationship with Whiterun that goes beyond the temple and the Gildergreen. Kinnereth is the goddess of the wind and the sky, and Whiterun, perched on an exposed rocky outcrop in the middle of a vast open plain, is one of the windiest inhabited places in Skyrim. On clear days, the wind that comes down from the throat of the world sweeps across the plains and up through the city streets with enough force to make conversation difficult near the walls. Devotees of Kinnereth regard this not as an inconvenience, but as the goddess's active presence. A reminder that the divine is not contained in temples, but experienced in the physical world. The Gildergreen's placement outside the temple, rather than within it, follows this logic. You do not go indoors to worship a nature deity. You go outside into the wind and let the world remind you that something made all of this. Balgruf's Talos contradiction. One of the more quietly significant aspects of Jarl Balgruf's character is his private relationship with Talos worship. The White Gold Concordat that ended the Great War explicitly bans the practice, and as a Jarl nominally loyal to the Empire, Balgruf is required to enforce this prohibition. He enforces it. He will not openly harbour Talos shrines or Talos priests. And yet his dialogue, when pressed, reveals genuine personal devotion to Talos. He believes. He simply cannot say so publicly without causing the kind of political crisis that would invite Thalmor attention to Whiterun. This private faith, hidden behind public compliance, makes Balgruf a precise representation of how the Talos prohibition worked in practice across Imperial Skyrim. Officially suppressed, privately sustained, with enforcement uneven enough that the worship survived by going underground. The most powerful man in Whiterun worships the most illegal god in secret, in a city where a man shouts that God's name publicly in the marketplace every single day. Sleeping Tree Camp's alien secret. Sleeping Tree Camp is a giant encampment west of Whiterun, where the game deposits one of its strangest and least explained mysteries. The camp itself is unremarkable, a collection of mammoth hides and bones arranged into a rough settlement. But at its center grows a tree unlike any other in Skyrim. It is purple. It glows faintly. Its roots descend into a pool of water that has taken on properties distinctly unlike water. The tree produces a sap that can be harvested from a spigot built into its trunk, either by a previous inhabitant or by the giants themselves. And this sap, when consumed, produces effects on the human body that combine extreme sedation, a 100-point health boost, and severe visual distortion. The tree is, to put it plainly, unlike anything else in Tamriel. Isolde herself acknowledges two competing theories when asked. Either a fragment of Red Mountain was blasted across Skyrim when Vardenfell erupted in the Red Year, and the tree grew from the crater it left, or a spore fell from one of the floating sky islands that appear in Elder Scrolls lore, possibly Umbriel, making the tree a distant cousin of the Hist trees of Black Marsh. Neither theory has been confirmed. What both share is the implication that whatever created the sleeping tree came from somewhere else entirely, carrying biology that has no natural place in Skyrim's ecology. Ulug's letter. At Sleeping Tree Camp, alongside the alien tree and its narcotic sap, is the body of an orc named Ulag. He did not die of natural causes, and the note he was carrying explains why he was there. Ulag was the contact point between Sleeping Tree Camp's sap supply and Isolde in Whiterun, who paid 150 gold per sample. He was a skooma runner's equivalent, operating in an unconventional narcotic rather than conventional moon sugar derivatives. Whoever killed Ulag, and UESP confirms it was the giants themselves, who tolerated his harvesting operations until one day they simply didn't. Left the supply chain intact enough that the sap is still being produced at the spigot, waiting for a collector who no longer arrives. The business model Isolde and Ulag constructed is fascinating in its simplicity. Find the alien drug tree, build a harvest mechanism, establish a buyer in the city, and quietly enrich yourself through the gap in Skyrim's drug enforcement framework that doesn't know what Sleeping Tree sap even is yet. Honningbru's secret basement, the Honningbrew Meadery that sits southeast of Whiterun, appears to be a simple mead production facility, Whiterun's local alternative to the politically connected Blackbriar Meadery. The basement tells a different story. A mad mage named Hamelin has been secretly occupying the lowest level of the Meadery, conducting experiments that involve skeever breeding on a significant scale. The venom-fang skeevers he has produced are notably larger and more aggressive than standard skeever populations, and he has been allowing them to contaminate the Meadery's water supply. His journal explains why. Hamelin was imprisoned in Whiterun for a decade, escaped, enrolled at the College of Winterhold as an apprentice alchemist, was then expelled. And he is now breeding an army of enhanced skeevers specifically to take revenge against both the city that jailed him and the college that cast him out. The Meadery's infrastructure simply provided a useful hidden environment for this work. Hamelin regards the contamination of Whiterun's mead supply and the harm to innocent workers as irrelevant background details in a revenge operation he considers entirely justified. His army of venom-fang skeevers is proof of concept. A man with real alchemical skill, pointing it entirely at grudges, waiting in the dark beneath someone else's business for the day he decides his revenge is ready. Maven's long game, the relationship between Honningbrew Meadery and Maven Blackbriar, the ruthless Riften matriarch who controls that city's political and criminal landscape, represents Maven's economic imperialism operating at range. Honningbrew is Whiterun's market competition for Blackbriar mead, which ships from Riften. Eliminating that competition is a business objective Maven has been working toward patiently. The Thieves Guild quest Dampen Spirits accomplishes this by using Hamelin's contamination as the catalyst for a sabotage that allows Maven to buy Honningbrew at a collapsed price and absorb it into the Blackbriar brand. After the quest, the signs at the Meadery change. What was Honningbrew is now Blackbriar. A Riften criminal family has extended their brand to Whiterun's doorstep, and the mechanism used to accomplish this was a combination of a mad mage's unrelated experiment and the Thieves Guild's professional services. Maven didn't create Hamelin's basement problem. She simply noticed it and redirected it toward a commercial outcome. Pelagia Farm's hidden history. Pelagia Farm, which sits alongside the road between Whiterun's main gate and Honningbrew Meadery, has been farming the same stretch of land for a significant period, long enough that the soil management techniques visible in the farm's layout reflect generational knowledge rather than a single owner's approach. The current owner, Severio Pelagia, is from Cyrodiil and has not been farming this specific land his whole life. The farm's infrastructure, the irrigation channels, the windbreaks, the specific crop rotation visible in the fields, suggest previous owners whose names are not preserved. Pelagia likely bought an established working farm rather than building from scratch. which raises the question of what happened to whoever built it. Land in Skyrim changes hands for many reasons: war, death, debt, departure. And the Hold's records from before the current era are incomplete. The farm Pelagia tends has a life that predates him, and will likely have one that outlasts him. The Western Watchtower's dragon, Mimolna, the dragon who attacks the Western Watchtower at the beginning of Skyrim's main quest, is not a random member of Alduin's returned forces. He is a specific dragon with his own history and his own place in the order of things that existed before the events of Skyrim's timeline. His name translates roughly from Dovazul as Allegiance Strong Hunt, a name that suggests a hunter's identity, a dragon defined by pursuit. His attack on the Watchtower is his first recorded action following the general resurrection of dragonkind, which may mean he was one of the earlier dragons Alduin raised from their burial mounds, impatient enough to act immediately rather than waiting for a more strategic moment. His death, killed by Whiterun guards, Irileth, and the player character, is the first time a dragon has been killed in Skyrim in an age. That it happens on Whiterun's doorstep, within sight of the city walls, positions Whiterun as the place where the dragon crisis becomes undeniably real rather than rumour. The Mammoth Cemetery, east of Whiterun, in the stretch of open plains between the city and the mountains, there is an area the game does not formally mark as significant, but which contains a cluster of mammoth remains. Mammoths in Skyrim are managed by giants, kept as a kind of livestock or companion animal, in a relationship that the game implies is more complex than simple herding. When a mammoth dies, giants do not leave the body where it fell. They appear to guide their animals towards specific locations at the end of life, creating natural accumulations of remains that the game's world treats as sacred ground. Giants will attack anyone who disturbs these sites. The sleeping mammoth skeletons, arranged in certain patterns near giant camps, suggest ritualistic behavior that goes far beyond what the game explicitly explains. Giants are not simply large hostile NPCs. They are beings with traditions, grief, and an understanding of death that expresses itself through behavior that any observer would recognize as ceremony. Chilfaro Farm's quiet life. Chilfaro Farm occupies the land south of Whiterun, between the main road and the Companions' training area. It produces standard agricultural goods, wheat primarily, and its workers manage the day-to-day operations with the steady, unhurried rhythm of people who have understood from the beginning that farming is patient work. The farm's owner, Nazim, is essentially invisible from its daily operations. His workers know how to do their jobs without supervision and have developed an informal management structure in his absence. The quiet competence of Chilfaro's workers, set against Nazim's ostentatious presence in Whiterun's marketplace, creates an accidental commentary on labor and ownership. The person who holds the deed adds nothing to the production, while the people doing the actual work produce everything of value. The wheat that ends up in Whiterun's bread and ale comes from people Nazim would not recognize if he saw them. The prosperity paradox. Rorikstead sits in a stretch of Whiterun Hold's northwestern landscape that is, by any agricultural assessment, not well suited to the kind of consistent, high-yield farming the village produces. The soil in that part of the plains is thinner and less fertile than the land near Whiterun proper. The winds that come across the western hills strip moisture from the ground faster than rainfall can replace it. Surrounding farms and settlements, including some with better land and longer histories, have struggled through the same climate conditions that Rorikstead somehow navigates successfully year after year. When you ask Rorikstead's residents about their crops, The responses are evasive in a way some players find telling. They speak about hard work and good management, which is exactly what you'd say if you wanted to acknowledge the question while deflecting its actual substance. Whether that evasiveness reflects something genuinely hidden, or simply the private nature of farming folk who don't appreciate outsiders questioning their success, is left entirely open. But the gap between Rorikstead's prosperity and its apparent agricultural conditions has led many players to wonder whether hard work and good management are the whole story. The mother problem. 3 of Rorikstead's household stories involve mothers who died in childbirth or shortly afterward. Sissel and Britta's mother died at Sissel's birth. Eric the Slayer's mother died when he was young. A third narrative thread hints at another maternal death in the village's recent history. Childbirth mortality in Skyrim's medieval analog society is high. This is not inherently suspicious on its own, but 3 recent maternal deaths in a village small enough that everyone knows everyone is the kind of pattern that catches a careful player's eye. The game never provides a direct explanation. It simply places these facts in the environment and leaves them there. One detail some players flag is the book Spirit of the Daedra. Found in the house of Juan Manet, Rorikstead's resident healer and herbalist, which discusses Daedric principles, including the concept of bargaining mortal lives for supernatural favors. Whether the book's presence is meaningful or simply ambient set dressing is exactly the kind of ambiguity the developers seem to have built deliberately into this village. Juan's lessons. Juan Manet is Rorikstead's elder, the person who has been there longest and who serves the community as a combination of healer, advisor, and historian. He is teaching Sissel, Lemkel's younger daughter, magic. This is presented in-game as a kindly older man nurturing a child's gift, a pleasant act of community care in an otherwise bleak household situation. What some players find curious is the specific curriculum Juan has chosen for her. He is not teaching healing magic, which would be the logical choice for a healer passing on knowledge. When Sissel asks him to teach her fire magic, even just a candle lighting spell, he refuses outright. Instead, he teaches her how to extinguish candles and separately, water breathing. A survival magic primarily useful for someone who might need to submerge in deep water for extended periods. The combination of flame suppression and underwater breathing is an unusual set of skills for a child in a farming village. Players who have assembled the broader Rorikstead theory have noted that this curriculum could suggest preparation for some kind of ritual purpose, though whether Juan is aware of that implication, or whether his choices are simply the product of what he happens to know himself, the game keeps carefully unresolved. The Daedric Soul Theory. When you stack up the accumulated evidence, the prosperity that doesn't match the land, the maternal deaths, the soul gems found in nearly every house, the Book of Daedra in Juain's possession, the suspicious evasiveness of every resident when asked direct questions, you arrive at one of Skyrim's most developed fan theories, that Rorikstead is operating under a Daedric pact, most likely with Clavicus Vile, the Daedric Prince of Bargains, wishes, and the granting of power at a price. The theory holds that the village's unusual agricultural productivity could be the result of a deal made generations ago, one that trades mortal lives for supernatural bounty. Nothing in the game's official dialogue or loading screens confirms this. Bethesda has never acknowledged it as intended lore, but the circumstantial case assembled by players from the details scattered through this small village is detailed enough that it's hard to dismiss as coincidence, and easy enough to interpret innocently that it could also just be careful, atmospheric world building that rewards paranoid reading. That ambiguity, ultimately, is what makes Rorikstead memorable. It's a village that invites you to construct a horror story out of its silence and then refuses to tell you whether you're right. Lokir's flight. Lokir of Rorikstead is the man you see executed at Helgen in the game's opening sequence. A horse thief who attempts to run when the execution begins and is immediately shot down by Helgen's archers. He is one of 3 named characters killed in Helgen's opening: the Imperial soldier, whose name is barely registered, a Stormcloak leader, and Lokir, who is defined entirely by his panicked claim that he is not a rebel, and his death seconds later. What the game does not dwell on, but which the player can piece together, is that Lokir left Rorikstead to steal horses, a somewhat desperate choice for a village that, according to the prosperity theory, should be economically comfortable. Whether Lokir left because he discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, or because the village's comfortable surface hid something that made him unable to remain, is left to interpretation. He is the only person from Rorikstead who appears elsewhere in the game. He died running. Sissel and the Candle. Sissel is, by any external reading of her situation, one of the more miserable children in Skyrim. Her father Lemkill is openly abusive. He calls her worthless, stupid, a mistake ugly, and her sister Brit has adopted enough of his cruelty to make the family's domestic environment a constant source of psychological damage. Sissel escapes this by spending her evenings outside, away from the farm, practicing the magic Juan has been teaching her. She is genuinely talented. The candle extinguishing spell she has been learning represents real magical ability, developed in difficult circumstances by someone with no access to formal training beyond an old man's instructions. Her sweetness, her kindness toward the player character, and her clear delight in her magical gift all feel like someone who has managed to remain themselves despite everything working against that outcome. Whatever Juan's actual intentions are, and the darkest interpretation of the theory makes them predatory, Sissel herself is not aware of any ulterior purpose. She is just a child who likes magic and has found one person in her life who takes her seriously. Eric the Slayer's Tribute. Eric is Rorikstead's would-be adventurer, a young man whose father Meralki, who runs the Frostfruit Inn, desperately wants him to stay safe on the farm, and who wants nothing more than to go out into the world with a sword and see what happens. His questline, in which you encourage Meralki to let Eric pursue his dream and then fund his equipment, sends Eric off into Skyrim as a potential follower. He is named in honor of Eric West, a real person who died of cancer after expressing through a Make-A-Wish style program his desire to be in a Bethesda game. The developers gave him his wish, and the character was designed accordingly. In-game, Eric carries the weight of this tribute in his eager, slightly nervous manner. Someone stepping into a big world for the first time, genuinely excited and genuinely scared in equal measure. He is flagged in the game's data as non-essential, which means he can die permanently. His father was right to be afraid. Skyrim is unforgiving of the inexperienced, and Eric, for all his heart, is very inexperienced. Dragon burial sites and Rorikstead. In the near vicinity of Rorikstead, there are dragon burial mounds, the kind from which Alduin resurrects dragons throughout the main quest. The proximity of these sites to a village known for strange prosperity and unexplained practices layers an additional dimension onto Rorikstead's ambient strangeness. Dragon burial mounds are, in Skyrim's lore, sacred sites where dragons that were killed in the ancient wars between men and dragons were interred by the dragon cult. The locations were chosen deliberately, not randomly. Areas of geological or spiritual significance that would sustain the dragon's essence until resurrection. That Rorikstead sits near such sites could be coincidence. But in a game world where geographical significance is often tied to supernatural activity, the cluster of strange details around one small village, the prosperity, the deaths, the suspicious evasiveness, the magic lessons, the Daedric literature, gains additional texture from the knowledge that the earth around Rorikstead is literally full of sleeping gods. The Dragon Rising's true weight. The quest called Dragon Rising, in which the Dragonborn first kills a dragon, absorbs its soul, and is revealed to Skyrim's world as something beyond ordinary, plays out on Whiterun's doorstep deliberately. This is not merely a location choice for early game convenience. Whiterun is the city that was built in response to the possibility of dragon return. Dragon's Reach exists because of Numenx. The Skyforge produced weapons that have been readied for dragon combat since before living memory. When the first dragon in centuries attacks the Western Watchtower, it attacks the exact city that was built to anticipate this moment. And when the Dragonborn absorbs Mirmulnir's soul and the Greybeard's thundering summons rolls across the plains loud enough to shake Dragon's Reach's windows, Jarl Bolgruf, descendant of Olaf One-Eye, the man who captured a dragon to prove Nordic supremacy, has to process the fact that the age his whole city was built to survive has begun. The civil war in Whiterun. Whiterun is unique among Skyrim's major cities in that it is the only one where the civil war plays out as an actual military assault on the city itself. Other cities change hands through political and administrative processes when their holds fall to one faction or another. Whiterun gets sieged. If the Stormcloaks assault the city, the battle takes place in its streets. Soldiers fight in the marketplace. Fire burns near the Gildergreen. Guards clash with Stormcloak warriors in the residential districts. The battle is not abstract or off-screen. You fight through the city you've been walking through since the game began, and the landmarks you've passed 100 times become tactical positions in a battle with real consequences. The damage persists afterward. The burn marks, the displaced residents, the changed roster of guards. Whiterun, after the Civil War battle, looks like a city that was fought over, because it was. Breezehome's history. Breezehome, the first purchasable player home in Skyrim, available for 5,000 gold from Proventus Avenici after the player retrieves the Dragonstone, has an in-game history that predates your ownership. It was not built specifically for you. It was an established Whiterun property that happens to be vacant when the game begins. The previous occupants are never named or described. The house's location in the Wind District, adjacent to the marketplace and close to both Jorvaska and the residential family homes, places it in the social middle of the city. Not the working poor of the Plains District, not the elite proximity of the Cloud District, but the established resident class that knows their neighbors and pays their taxes on time. When you furnish the house with Lydia's alchemy corner and weapon display, you're moving into a space that has absorbed generations of ordinary Whiterun life, and the walls don't tell you anything about it. Lydia's true role. Lydia, assigned to you as Housecarl when you become Thane of Whiterun, is one of the game's most beloved and most underestimated characters. Her famous line about being sworn to carry your burdens has become shorthand for follower mechanics, but the role she actually occupies, Housecarl, is not a servant's position. In Nordic tradition, a Housecarl is an elite warrior assigned to protect a person of significant status, a guardian whose loyalty is personal and absolute. Lydia is not a porter. She is the personal bodyguard of someone the Jarl has identified as important enough to warrant protection at the level of military assignment. That she ends up carrying cheese wheels and lockpicks is a consequence of the player's choices, not her job description. Her reported frustration with this, visible in unused dialogue files, where she expresses with considerable specificity what she thinks of being used as a mobile storage unit, reflects someone who was trained for something other than what she's been asked to do. The Companions' economic model. The Companions, as an organization, operate on a contract-based economy that is, by the standards of Skyrim's other institutions, remarkably transparent. They take jobs, they complete them, they get paid. The work ranges from clearing bandit camps, to retrieving stolen items, to escorting merchants, to intimidating people who owe money to people who hired the Companions to intimidate them. The last category is interesting. The Companions, Skyrim's most celebrated warrior guild with a reputation for honor, do debt collection and muscling work as part of their standard business. This does not appear to trouble anyone morally, which tells you something about the ethical framework of Skyrim's economy. The Companions are not hypocrites for this. They simply operate within the moral conventions of their society, which regard violence in service of legitimate economic contracts as entirely respectable. The honor code is real. It just applies to how you conduct the violence, not to whether the violence is ethically justifiable in a larger sense. Skarl and the Throat of the World. The Throat of the World is visible from Whiterun on clear days, a distant peak that dominates the southern horizon, the highest point in all of Tamriel. Most Whiterun residents experience it as landscape background, an enormous geological fact that shapes the hold's weather and geography without requiring direct engagement. But for those who understand what the Throat of the World is, the mountain where Kinnereth breathed life into the first mortals, where the ancient Nords meditated on the creation of language and the power of the Thu'um, where the Greybeards have been waiting for centuries. The view from Dragon's Reach's balcony is an act of sustained proximity to something sacred. When the Greybeards summon the Dragonborn, the sound that comes from High Hrothgar is audible across the hold. Everyone in Whiterun hears it. Most of them know what it means. The city has been in the shadow of that mountain forever, and for one specific generation in one specific year, the mountain finally makes direct contact with the city beneath it, the invisible Thalmor. Whiterun has no visible Thalmor presence. There is no Thalmor embassy here, no stationed justiciars conducting routine patrols, no obvious diplomatic infrastructure of the kind visible in Solitude or Windhelm. This absence is itself a presence. The Thalmor operate through networks of influence rather than overt occupation, and Whiterun's central trading position makes it a city where people pass through rather than settle, which is ideal for intelligence gathering without the political friction of a visible installation. The letters and documents you find throughout the game that reference Thalmor intelligence operations, the file on Ulfric in the Thalmor embassy, the networks of informants scattered across Skyrim cities, suggest that Whiterun is being watched without appearing to be watched. The city's marketplace provides cover for any number of information exchanges. Its position at the crossroads of Skyrim's trade routes means that everything worth knowing eventually passes through, and the Thalmor know how to listen to commerce. The College of Winterhold's distance, Farengar's secret fire's complicated relationship with the College of Winterhold, implied but not fully explained in his dialogue, reflects Whiterun's broader disconnection from Skyrim's magical establishment. The college in the far north represents the formal, institutional face of magical study in Skyrim, organized credentialed, and isolated from the political upheavals affecting the rest of the province by its extreme geographical remoteness. Whiterun's magical presence is entirely informal. A court mage with undefined affiliations, an alchemy merchant, a handful of enchanting services. For a city of Whiterun's size and commercial importance, the absence of a Mages Guild chapter or college affiliate is notable. It may reflect the city's pragmatic culture. Whiterun's warriors and merchants have historically been more interested in practical applications than theoretical study. Or it may reflect a deliberate policy choice by Jarls who found the magical establishment's political complications more trouble than the benefits were worth. The Stormcloak sympathizers. Scattered throughout Whiterun's residential population are people whose Stormcloak sympathies are expressed through dialogue, household items, and their reactions to different questline outcomes, but who maintain a surface level of compliance with Balgruuf's officially neutral position. The Greymane family is the most visible example, but they are not alone. Several ordinary residents express views that align with Ulfric's position on Nordic cultural independence and the Talos prohibition, including people whose daily lives give them no particular stake in the war beyond the general cultural grievances that fuel it. These quiet sympathizers represent a political reality Balgruuf cannot ignore. His city is not as neutral as his official position. He holds the neutral line because the alternative is committing to a conflict that will certainly damage Whiterun regardless of which side wins. But he is holding it against the current, and both he and his advisors know it. The Khajiit outside the gates. The Khajiit merchant caravans that camp outside Whiterun's walls and outside every major city in Skyrim are denied entry, ostensibly for cultural and security reasons. The prejudice against Khajiit in Skyrim is explicit. They are assumed to be thieves and smugglers, their caravans suspected of carrying contraband, their presence in enclosed spaces regarded as threatening. The irony is that the Khajiit merchants outside Whiterun's gates are, in terms of customer service quality and merchandise selection, often better than the merchants inside. They have rare goods, they have skooma-adjacent products for those who want them, and they have none of the established merchants' ability to claim a monopoly on customer attention. They survive and profit despite the discrimination because they fill a market gap that Whiterun's closed community creates by excluding them. The prejudice generates its own commercial consequence. The people least trusted become the people best positioned to serve the trade that formal merchants won't touch. Whiterun after Alduin. The main quest's conclusion, Alduin's defeat in Sovngarde, does not visibly transform Whiterun in the way a dramatic ending might suggest. The city continues, the markets operate, the companions take new contracts, Heimska shouts about Talos, Nazim asks about the Cloud District. The normalcy of Whiterun after the world-ending dragon has been stopped is one of the game's quieter commentary moments. Civilization is resilient, daily life resists narrative, and the people who were going about their business before the crisis mostly go about their business after it ends. The Dragonborn, who has walked the paths of the dead and spoken with ancient heroes and eaten dragon souls, can return to Breezeholm and organize their alchemy ingredients. The world was saved. Nobody changed their schedules. The campfire that got you through the end of the world is the same campfire that was there at the beginning, and the city sitting beside it keeps burning through the night, regardless of who the world was saved for.